And welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. And you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Rocky Romanella, who is not a boxer, just has a name that sort of sounds like one. Rocky is the president and CEO of 360 Management Services. He's the author of a really cool book called Tighten the Lug Nuts. He's got an amazing career as an executive. So he was CEO and director of Unitech Global. He was at UPS for 30 years and oversaw the sort of rebranding of mailboxes, et cetera. So sort of a logistics and supply chain guy. I'm not going to go into all his career stuff, but it's long and extensive. But what I find interesting about Rocky is making that transition from accomplished senior executive and then sort of diving into the author, thought leader, speaker universe. So that's what we'll chat about today. So welcome aboard, Rocky.
Hey, Peter, good morning. It's great to be on the show with you today.
Why, thank you. So let's see, where do we start? So what, if anything, was happening to you on the career side when you were in the corporate world that sort of maybe gave you an inkling that speaking could be fun or writing could be fun or motivating people and talking to people could be fun? What exposure did you have there that sort of sparked the embers a bit?
Well, I never really had this desire to write a book or even do speaking. In fact, if you lined up most of my high school friends, which is now over 40 years ago, they would all laugh at you and say it's probably the last guy that would be do public speaking is Rocky Romanella. In fact, I always joke about the fact that going to Catholic school, growing up in a nice little Italian Catholic kid there, that the only part I wanted in the school play was the shepherd. I wanted to point to the star. That was it. I want no speaking part. But one thing that, though, I will say that always one of my burning desires was to be a teacher. I originally went to college to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And so, as I was working my way through UPS part time, paying my way through school, I recognized early on that the most successful leaders were those individuals who could get people to connect the dots and were good teachers as leaders. And so I never gave up my teaching passion. The classroom went from the traditional classroom to a business setting. And so I got my coaching fix and teaching fix throughout my career at UPS. So I would say that that was probably the burning passion, that I had. And it was something that was instilled in me. And as a great teacher does, it motivates its students to learn and gets them to connect the dots. The speaking became part of what you needed to do to be successful. And so I recognized early on as I was growing and developing inside of UPS that if I was going to be successful, I had to be a good communicator. And sometimes that communication meant that I had to come outside of my comfort zone and I had to be a good speaker. One on one was never a problem with me. I enjoyed those one on one conversations, but I had no choice if I was going to be successful. What I mean by successful isn't in a title or, in a level I got to, or to me, success was the ability to execute, the ability to get people to understand what we're trying to accomplish.
Sure.
So I had no choice but to work on my speaking, kind of skills.
So let me ask you this, because one of the things that I've observed is there are folks out there that are authors and thought leaders and have great content that prefer to deliver it in a more intimate way, be that coaching, be that consulting, be that working in small groups doing workshops, but really, in a place where you can connect at an individual level to people and you can see that your stuff is making a difference, like they're internalizing it, they're thinking about it, you're going to challenge them, etc. That's one skill set. A very different skill set is to have stage presence, to be able to communicate in mass, to be able to effectively motivate and communicate on the stage, which is very, very different. You've got an interesting blend of both of those, but I would say sort of the underlying driver throughout your life has been this sort of teacher piece. So could you talk about the differences between sort of the one to one or the more intimate and then sort of that stage?
Well, the stage component came about ironically because of my ability and comfort zone in the one-to-one. And so when early on in my career at UPS, I got the opportunity to do a lot of speaking on behalf of UPS. And then when you were leading large groups of people, just by design, you ended up with, for example, if you're in a center and you're talking to drivers, it could be 150, 200 drivers just standing around you talking to you. So you had no
Sure.
choice. But my trick was because I was much better at one to one. as I'm speaking to large groups, I'm picking out people inside the group and just looking at them and speaking to them and kind of putting on these blinders that I'm really here talking to just Peter today, even though he surrounding Peter is 175 people. And so that was my
So making that sort of connection to whatever Sally in the seventh row or something.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of my most positive feedbacks is besides, being comfortable and witty and all of those kinds of things, it's always, I felt like you connected. I felt like you were making eye to eye contact with an audience that was so large. Well, and I kind of always smile to myself because yes, that's true, but I'm really helping myself more than I'm probably thinking. You're thinking I'm helping you.
Sure,
So that was sort of my trick, and I just got better and better at it. And so I felt like the ability to have those one-on-one conversations was so important, but also to be able to do it in a large group audience was my way of also maybe getting to kind of a much broader reach that way. And so
sure.
I just kept practicing at it, and like anything else, the more you do it, and I started to have fun with it. Where before it was always the kind of like I got to go do the speech, it's just part of my responsibility. And I started to say, well, wait a second, if I'm going to do it, I have this, thought that if someone, look, if you're going to do something, someone's going to be the best at it. Why not you? So
Yep,
look, if someone's
exactly.
going to go give a public, go give a keynote speech, someone's going to be the best keynote speaker we've seen. Why not me then? So if I'm going to do it, I might as well try to be the best at it.
Well, it's also not the type of role. We all have days at work that we look at the end of the day and go, "Yeah, that wasn't my greatest day." It's kind of hard to do that in a keynoter when every day is in front of 2 or 300
Right.
people. Other than maybe a pitcher or something like that. You don't have
Right.
that many critics. I want to sort of pivot for a moment. So when you went from job to job, from UPS to Unitech, right? There's a pretty clear thing like this is what I'm going to do on my first day. I have a new role. I have clearly defined responsibilities. I have to get familiar with the people around me, the culture. Like there's sort of a logical checklist of what I need to do my first couple of months on this job to have the impact and make sure I'm successful. Tell me, sort of compare that to the first day where you're out there as Rocky the Lug Nuts guy, right? Rocky the keynote, or Rocky the coach and the consultant. Like there is not necessarily a job description, nor are there resources to hold your hands and say, okay, Rocky, here's the computer you're going to use, and then this is what we do here. How do you talk to me about your first sort of maybe 90, 100 days in this world?
Well, that's a great question because for me, I actually got that finite where I actually lay out my 100-day plan in whatever I'm trying to accomplish. So, for example, when I took over as CEO of Unitech, I actually laid out a 100-day plan and presented it to the board and said, "Okay, this is what I'm looking to do in my first 100 days." So I try to articulate that as best I can, so then I hold myself accountable to those results. Interestingly enough,
So I just want to pause there for a minute because there's maybe 2% of folks that I work with, deal with, come across in the author thought leadership space that apply that level of senior executive rigor and discipline to this world. So what I've seen are people that are former CEOs of $100 billion companies sort of dive into thought leadership. They hold their nose and jump in the pool, and on the way making that dive, see if there's water there. But you took the same discipline and rigor and things that served you well as a senior executive and said, wait, what do I want to accomplish over the next 100 days? How am I going to get there? What are the resources I need? That's incredibly unusual.
well, thank you, sir. But it's interesting because what I did, so in the workspace and changing jobs, for me, it was always this concept of balanced leadership. So, for example, in the book, I talk a lot about balanced leadership, and it's this concept of, you think like a customer, you feel like a valued individual, but you act like an owner in all the decisions that you make. So that wasn't as applicable in this, kind of new world of speaking and leadership training. And so for me, the concept was this concept of legacy. I always believe that that's what the kind of defines you as a leader. What's your legacy? And for me, legacy is do you leave things a little better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? And so when I laid out my 90 to 100 day, my plan for speaking and training, I laid it out with that thought in mind. Okay, if it's about legacy, then every speech I do, or every keynote, or every breakout session, or training workshop we do, and even the consulting that we do we leave things a little better than we found them? Are people better because of their time with you? And so that's why when I'm doing a keynote speech, I'm I need to make sure in my mind that there's some takeaway for everybody here. I mean, the stories are great, and maybe let's face it, as a good keynote speaker, there should be an education and entertainment piece. But if it's all entertainment, Peter, people walk away and say, "Yeah, it was really great."
Yeah.
But how many speakers have you and I sat at a conference at, and you're thinking, this was high energy, really exciting, but I can't use any of this.
If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. Right. So let's talk about the takeaways, right? Because you've got your body of work, right? And then the audience has changed. So how much do you adjust the keynote or the themes or maybe some of the stories, etc., to meet the needs of a specific audience? One day you might be in front of actuaries, and the next day in front of supply chain people, etc. So there's probably some universal takeaways, but how much noodling do you do to make sure there's as high a level of relevance as there could be to the potential to the specific audience?
So what I try to do is, and it's kind of something I learned through my UPS days, and it was one of those, kind of things you've learned that you weren't sure, you understood why you were doing it because they told you to do it, but later on became sort of the hallmark of kind of my, management, kind of approach to things, and that was, I started part time on loading and loading trailers, but then when to become a full time supervisor in those days, you actually had to be a driver, and so I drove in Plainfield, New Jersey. And that lesson always stuck with me that, okay, anything I'm going to do, especially something I'm going to do new that I don't really understand or know to the depth that I should or want to, I need to get out there and understand it and learn it. So, for example, when we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, and rebranded to the UPS store, I got that as a direct report at UPS. First thing I did was go work a day in the store. I took over supply chain.
Got it.
Well, it's
Got
the
it.
same with this. So when I get, when someone talks to me about doing a potential speech, to your point, right? I could be doing, corrugated box company, Association of America to, I did one with, dental labs. Well, the first, as we're talking, I always ask them, okay, give me 4 or 5 dental labs that I could go visit. Go give me some individuals that I want to talk to those people. I went out and visited some corrugated box companies and what keeps you up awake at night. So now I'm starting to think, okay, I've got this keynote speech, for example, on balanced leadership or why values matter, whatever that speech is. But now I want real life examples from their industry, not from what Rocky Romanella did. While it sounds impressive.
Well, and isn't it also fun to be a lifelong learner and say, geez, who else gets to learn about, dental labs one day and something totally different the next? It's sort of, because business is business, but every business has its own sort of cadence and culture and challenges and stressors and use of technology. So I love the part where it's like, wait, I'm getting paid to learn all sorts of cool stuff about things that I never would have had exposure to.
Oh, absolutely, and the great people you meet. I mean, how they
Yeah.
came up through their businesses, right? I mean,
Yep.
and it's interesting, Peter, when you're working with a lot of these companies that are in associations, they're all generally very small business owners who
Yep.
have generational businesses. Hey, I'm the third generation.
Yep.
That to me is so cool how their dad or grandfather, talking to I did a speech with the Arp and Van Lines, for example, and they're telling me how it was started and they're the third generation. That is so cool. I mean, to me, like you don't see that anymore in today's business. And so that's the part I love. And then it also allows me then to bridge that gap, right? Because if legacy is this concept of you leave things a little better than you found them, people are better because of their time with you. The only way I can accomplish that is by getting to know at least their business. And look, they know I'm not an expert on their business. They're just they just feel the respect that I took the time to learn their business and learn some of their problems.
And I think as a speaker, there's too many speakers today and I find this more common almost as a direct correlation to the more successful they are, the less that they're getting in touch and customizing. So, I call it sort of the drive-by. They're in Cleveland on Tuesday and, Austin on Friday and don't know if that group uses the term client or customer, doesn't know if they're in front of, salespeople or associates or whatever the, sort of lingoage, and people can smell that in the audience. Going, okay, he's here, he's spending an hour with us, but he doesn't know anything about us. He hasn't put in his time and energy and effort. And I think that there's a level of disrespect that shows
Oh,
to the
absolutely,
audience.
and I think some of that comes from, like you said, conferences that we attended, right? So, the keynote speaker rolls in with their wheelie bag, shows up like half hour before, hands them their, memory stick. They load it all up. They do their 45
Yep.
minutes, and they're great. I mean, look, they're high quality individuals. They have great knowledge. But all of us, as we're going through that presentation, are going through. Okay, this is a really very good presentation. Well done. But then how am I going to use this, you know, back where in my day-to-day routine? And so for me, that's the
Yep.
key. That's the
Right.
biggest thing. I always used to sit there and say, and I'm sure you've gone through this and many times yourself. Hey, if I ever got to that spot, I certainly gonna be. I mean, I'm gonna try to do things a little differently, or how would I present it, or why can't they give me examples
Yep.
that I could kind of have that aha moment. That's the other thing I try to do is create these aha moments. Oh, okay, all right,
And you don't need a ton. You just need a an anecdote, a story, some like. You don't need a ton to show. Hey, it's also a signaling to the audience of I've done my homework.
Yes, yes, it's funny. The question I always ask the meeting planner or event planner or the person working with me trying to decide whether they want to hire me as their keynote speaker or a breakout session individual. I always ask them, well, 6 months from now, as the individuals in your conference are, doing their daily routines and they stop, what is it that you want them to think about? What is it what's the aha moment you want them to have? Oh, I could use this or whatever. And it's funny because a lot of times they'll stop and say, well, oh, I've never been asked that question
Yeah,
before.
no, it's a great
You
question.
know, a- and see, my goal is that that's what happens 6 months from now or 3 months from now. It's something takes place in a place of business or in their daily routines, and they're like, wait a second, you know what? That thing that little guy told me I should use maybe here is not a bad idea, kind
Yep.
of idea. So that and that's
You
yeah, yeah,
become
that's
a voice in my
but
head
that
then.
all goes back to that as we talked about in the beginning here, that kind of 90, 100-day plan as I was building, okay, my first, as I was going to my first keynote officially now, not on behalf of a company that I work for or as a CEO. Now I'm going as this, keynote speaker. Okay, what's my, I'm building this plan of, okay, what's my first speech going to be like and how am I going to deliver it? It was all these thoughts of, okay, well, this is what I didn't like as a audience participant. How do I fix that? Those kinds of ideas.
Love it. So I want to pivot to the book. So first, I love the title, and you and I have talked in preparation for today about the concept of tighten the lug nut. So I want to touch on that for a moment, but then I want you to just share with us the journey of the light bulb goes off. I'm going to write a book, and fast forward some period of time, the decisions that you made in terms of how you published and how that book has served you, what you might do differently, and what you did in retrospect that you're really glad that you did.
Okay.
So first, let's talk about sort of the what is the essence of Tighten the Lug Nuts because it's a cool story.
Well, thank you for asking. So I won't go into the complete story. I'll give someone a chance to read it in the book. But the short story is simply this: when the lug nuts are loose on a vehicle, they're important, obviously. But if you don't tighten them, and it takes a few minutes to just tighten those lug nuts, but you don't tighten them, you get distracted, something comes up, and then a few days later, when the front wheel comes off, all of a sudden that becomes urgent. And we
Yep.
can only handle so many urgent things in life and in business. And so often you'll hear somebody say, I got no luck. This just happened. And now I'm off a plan. I can't get anything done. Well, if you go back and look, it's always some loose lug nut that happened. They could have fixed immediately or easily, and they didn't fix it. Now it became urgent. So for me, I always talk about don't allow important things to become urgent. You can only handle so many important things. So tighten the lug nuts. And it's funny over the course of time, as I've given these talks or speeches, or I'll do as much volunteering as I can with like high school seniors at college. I do some work at Seton Hall University in particular. And as they're entering the workforce or talking about preparing for, this next phase in their life, I always tell them loose lug nuts will kill you. And if it's like tighten the lug nuts. And then you'll always have a
Right.
student raise their hand. Ah, yeah, it sounds like my parents when
Right.
that final I didn't study for it. Now, yeah, that's a loose lug nut. So now people they call me the lug nut guy. Hey, I got no more loose lug nuts, Mr. Romanella. I'll see the kids in school, at Starbucks or something. They're like, hey,
So I think there's two pieces there. One is I just love the visual of that, but language matters, right? And creating something that's got that stickiness where you'll bump into someone that saw you keynote 3 years later and they're like, hey Rocky the lug nut guy, right? Like that's powerful because between you only had an hour with them, they're one of X number of people in an audience, but that's stuck, and I think that's really really important to be able to come up with a platform. I don't want to say a tagline because it sounds trite. Something that will stick with people, that sparks them to rethink through that concept and be able to say, aha, maybe I don't know what lug nuts I should be tightening, or whatever it is, right? But I really enjoy that. So tell us about the story of the book now. So you decide to write a book, and there's a series of decisions you have to make, how to publish and all that. So give us the sort of, we're running a little short on time here, the condensed version of how the book came to be.
Well, the first big step for me was, as we talked about before, this ability to go out and learn and try to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. As a leader, I never liked that feeling of when, Peter, you brought something to me and said to me, "Hey, I got this idea." I never liked, I always wanted to challenge you to not stop at the first right answer and try to get maybe
Right.
look past that. But I never liked that feeling saying, "Well, what if, or maybe you should look at it this way." And so years ago, I created this character, Joe Scafone. And so I would say to you,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, Peter, that's a great idea, but you think Joe Scafone thinks that's a good idea?" And that was my way of challenging you. Well, that was the first big step in the writing of the book. I never wanted to write a
Right.
book that would be, "I think you should do this," or "I did this." So the book became authored by Joe Scafone. So it was Joe Scafone's journey throughout his business career, and that's how the book really started to breathe life, because I couldn't really get past this writing this book of saying, "Wow, I would do this or I would do that." So then once I authored it as Joe Scafone, and used Joe Scafone as the main character, it just started to flow. And then the second thing I wanted to do was make sure that each chapter could stand on its own, right? Because there are times in business that you want to go back to something that I read in a great book, but where is it in the book? And so for me, I made it a story, but also chapters that could stand on their own as pieces that you could use in your business to maybe from an education, training, a development perspective. And so I was trying.
So almost a modular approach, right? I don't have to necessarily read the book in a linear fashion, but I can pull out chapter 5 that talks about X.
Yes, sir. That's exactly right. So it became a useful book, even if you didn't have the chance to maybe read it all at one time, or you read it and said, "Hey, I want to talk about that 100-day plan that Joe Scafone used." You
Right.
could go back to
Right.
that, and it's there in the book as a separate kind of standalone lesson plan, lesson guide.
Fantastic. Well, I can't thank you enough for joining us today, Rocky. I love the story and the style and what you bring to the table in terms of that rigor and discipline from an executive, the lifelong learning, the passion, and the approachability, of the content. This isn't, sort of this highfalutin theoretical abstract. You need a PhD to decode it. There's a combination of common sense and wrapped in business savvy that I just love about your stuff. So thanks for joining us today, Rocky.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you today, Peter, and your audience. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks. To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.